Fireworks lit up the sky of the cheers, explosions. But inside a small house, another sound broke through. Repeated stabs of a knife, 24 in total. While neighbors still looked upward, a young man collapsed on the floor. The killer did not flee. She remained seated, hands still covered in blood. The flicker of fireworks through the window illuminating the scene. No one on the street imagined that bonfire night had drowned out a final cry. Cases like this stretched across England. No need for a stranger. The hand that struck was the one once loved. Today's subject: when a toxic relationship becomes a sentence. When love turns into an eruption, louder than the fireworks outside. If there is a detail that unsettles you, leave it in the comments. And to continue opening the files that remain unfinished, subscribe. Because when the story ends, silence is the only thing left. The small house in Greenwich was no different from hundreds of others on the same street. A family of 3. Dion Christy, 35 years old, her husband Ian Christy, and a young child. From the outside, the picture was of stability. Inside, the fractures had existed for a long time. Dion was frequently suspicious. Any unknown call, any late return home from Ian was scrutinized. Neighbors sometimes heard arguments, but paid little attention. A jealous wife, a husband explaining. It seemed ordinary in marriage. One night in 2014, the silence of the street was broken inside their bedroom. Ian lay on the bed, unable to react before Dion had taken a knife. Multiple stabs, rapid and successive, driven directly into his body. The child in the next room remained asleep, unaware. By the time the last thrust ended, Ian no longer moved. Dion did not call for help. No ambulance, no shout, no attempt at aid. She sat still, knife in hand, watching the blood spread across the bed sheets. Time passed, minute by minute, hour by hour. Any chance of survival was lost in silence. Police arrived later. They found Ian's body, covered in wounds, while the child slept undisturbed. Dion did not deny it. In her statement, she said briefly, "I thought he was cheating on me." No apology, no explanation, just a flat declaration. Investigators closed the file quickly. No third person in the room, no alibi to examine. Blood on her clothes, the knife still in her hand. Everything was direct. They recorded. Homicide, multiple stab wounds, domestic context. The 2015 trial at Old Bailey drew press attention. Dion stood in the dock, face expressionless, minimal reaction. Prosecutors described it as a killing driven by blind jealousy. The defense cited unstable psychology, but the jury did not accept it. The physical evidence was too clear. The final verdict. Dion Christy was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 14 years before parole review. She showed no reaction when the sentence was read. In the courtroom, only the sound of a pen signing, chairs shifting, and silence remained. The consequences did not end there. The child grew up without a father and without a mother present. The Greenwich house was sealed, becoming an address people avoided mentioning. Neighbors later said they still remembered the bedroom light in their minds and thought of the knife left on the bedside table. In police files, the case was recorded as a textbook example of jealousy leading to domestic violence. No long-term plan, no financial motive, only repeated suspicion building until it broke. A family destroyed in one night, with no sound outside, unnoticed until it was too late. The question that lingers: how many marriages, behind quiet walls, conceal an invisible knife? The blood-soaked bedsheet from the Greenwich flat was rolled, sealed inside a police evidence bag. A deep red mark, impossible to erase. But there are also bodies that do not remain on the bed, not discovered immediately. They are hidden, pressed into cold spaces, where the smell of decay is temporarily suppressed. In another flat, hundreds of miles away, the only constant sound was the compressor of a freezer. A monotonous hum, steady, seemingly harmless. But behind the layer of ice, a body was locked inside a suitcase, awaiting discovery. The house in Newcastle, where Peter McMahon lived, once appeared stable. He was over 60, a former civil servant, retired with enough funds for a comfortable life. He met Sharon Swinho, a 44-year-old woman, unstable, with complicated relationships. To neighbors, they seemed mismatched. An older, quiet man and a younger woman, volatile and impulsive. During their time together, Sharon began to take control. She used Peter's money, sometimes signing in his name to withdraw more. But greed did not stop there. In December 2012, the plan to end the relationship was set. Sharon joined with Joseph Collins, a 54-year-old drifter. That night, Peter was attacked. He had no chance to resist. They tied him, beat him, then gouged out his eyes with a sharp object. The pain led to cardiac arrhythmia, then stopped entirely. Peter died inside his own home. His death was not reported to the police. Instead, Sharon and Collins concealed it. They forced his body into an old suitcase, strapped it shut, then placed it inside the freezer in the kitchen. The door closed, the compressor running steadily. To outsiders, the house remained quiet. Inside, a body was kept cold like an object without life. In the days that followed, Sharon continued her routine. She used Peter's bank cards, withdrawing money as if he was still alive. Neighbors rarely saw Peter, but Sharon offered vague explanations. He was away. He was resting. No one verified. Police only took notice when Peter's friends and relatives could not reach him. An investigation began. They arrived at the house, and a strange smell from the kitchen made them stop. When the freezer door was opened, cold air escaped along with the odor of decay. Inside, the suitcase was visible, and within it, Peter's body had been folded unnaturally. The death left no doubt. Wounds on the face, signs of violence, and the fingerprints of Sharon and Collins present throughout. Both were arrested shortly after. In her statement, Sharon did not deny it. Her words were brief, detached, Collins also admitted involvement. Neither offered any explanation beyond needed money and didn't want him in the way anymore. The 2013 trial at Newcastle Crown Court concluded with Sharon convicted of murder, sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. Collins received 20 years. Prosecutors emphasized the brutality and the calculated concealment. The image of the suitcase in the freezer became the symbol of the case. Years later, in 2021, Sharon died in prison from COVID-19. The notice was short. Deceased. Cause: pandemic-related illness. No funeral. No mention beyond a brief line in a local paper. But the after effect remained. The Newcastle house stood empty for a long time. Locals said that passing by, they still recalled the hum of the freezer in memory. The cold had preserved not only a body, but the truth deliberately hidden for weeks. The case was remembered as proof. The killer is not always a stranger waiting outside. Sometimes it is the person who shares the same bed, the same meals. And when greed and control erupt, the result is not only a death, but a lingering coldness that remains in the memory of an entire street. The freezer in Newcastle stayed shut. Its steady compressor hum as if trying to hold on to a secret. But every secret eventually thaws, revealing a truth that cannot be covered. Some cases need no suitcase, no delay. They occur in a single moment, between a stifled breath and a trembling hand gripping a small knife. In Peterborough, after a night of drinking, a quiet room turned into a crime scene. No freezer to keep the body. No days of concealment. Just one stab, and everything ended instantly. Peterborough, winter 2018. On a narrow street, yellow lights fractured across the wet pavement. Martina Ogenowska, 18, walked with a group of friends after drinking. In her coat pocket, she carried a small folding knife, a gift from a friend who once said, "Keep it with you, for safety." Martina was born in Poland, raised in years marked by fractures. Her childhood was tied to violence and abuse. Later medical files recorded PTSD, anxiety, trauma history. A young, fragile girl entered adulthood carrying nightmares that never ceased. That night, alcohol blurred everything. Martina met Filip Yuskevich, 23. They spoke, then went home together. But in the small room, the atmosphere shifted. Words gave way to violence. Filip pushed her onto the bed, his hands tightening around her throat, his weight pressing down. Martina struggled. In the moment her airway closed, she pulled the folding knife from her coat pocket. A single strike, forceful, direct, the blade pierced his heart. Filip froze, then collapsed, motionless. The room fell into silence. Martina's heavy breathing was the only sound. No plan to hide the body. No time for an explanation. When police arrived, they found her seated, hands trembling, the knife still blood-stained. In her statement, Martina's words were brief. "I thought he wouldn't stop." Nothing further. The autopsy confirmed. A single stab wound through the heart, instantly fatal. Police concluded homicide. But Martina's psychological profile was more complex. Doctors noted repeatedly her history of abuse, enduring trauma, and panic responses. The question remained, was it self-defense or murder? The 2019 trial at Cambridge Crown Court unfolded in a heavy atmosphere. The prosecution argued Martina had intentionally carried a knife and in using it had killed Philip. The defense stressed she was an 18-year-old with PTSD, choked with no other option. The jury did not agree. The final verdict: life imprisonment, minimum term of 17 years. Martina listened to the sentence without reaction. Standing in the dock, her face was calm, her eyes vacant. The courtroom was silent. Only the sound of a pen signing the judgment remained. In the years after, the case echoed. Women's protection groups, victim support organizations called for review. They described her as a victim-turned-offender, a double victim, first of abuse, then of prison. But appeals in 23 and 2005 were both denied. The sentence remained. In Peterborough, people still recall the case as something strange. A slight girl, a single knife wound, ending a man's life in seconds. No plan, no long scheme, just a moment of eruption between violence and fear. In police files, the case was closed with the line, "Murder, minimum term 17 years." But for many, the question remained, was it murder or a desperate act by a girl trying to keep her breath? And as in every case before, the answer never became clear. Only silence remained in the room in Peterborough, where one knife strike turned an act of defense into a life sentence. A single knife strike in Peterborough was enough to end everything within seconds. But violence does not always stop in a single moment. On some nights, the knife does not fall once, but many times, in succession, until the body before it becomes silent mass. Leicester, Bonfire Night, 2012. While fireworks burst across the sky, their light reflected through the glass of a small house. Inside, the knife struck 24 times, each thrust masking a firework outside, until the only sound left was the quickened breath of the one holding the blade. Leicester, November, Bonfire Night. In the sky, fireworks flared bright, explosions mixed with cheers. In a small suburban house, another sound cut through. Repeated stabs staring into the body of a young man. 24 wounds. While people on the street gazed at the lights above, a death unfolded quietly beneath the dim yellow bulb. The woman holding the knife was Michelle Mills, 30 years old, mother of 2. For months, she had been in a relationship with Eddie Miller, 20 years old. They met in a pub, quickly entangled. To neighbors, Eddie was young and lively. Michelle, strong and forceful. Inside, the relationship was filled with control and violence. They argued often. Friends recalled frequent scenes of Michelle's jealousy, with Eddie equally defiant. The quarrels usually ended in silence, but no one imagined they would lead to tragedy. On the night of November 5th, 2012, after drinking at a pub, the argument ignited again. Michelle left first, returning home. When Eddie entered the small house, the dispute continued. In anger, Michelle took a kitchen knife. The blade came down repeatedly, fast, relentless. 24 strikes to chest, abdomen, arms, leaving no chance of survival. Eddie collapsed on the floor. His body no longer moved. Michelle remained beside him, hands stained with blood, breath unsteady, while outside, fireworks still cracked in the air. No one in the neighborhood realized that the last cry had been drowned out by celebration. Police arrived soon after. They entered to find Eddie's body sprawled, wounds covering his frame, blood seeping into the carpet. Michelle had not fled. She sat at the scene, eyes vacant. When handcuffs were placed on her, she did not resist. In her statement, Michelle said the argument made her lose control. No prior scheme, no plan. Only anger breaking loose. But 24 knife wounds could not be taken as a single moment of impulse. Police recorded multiple stab wounds, intent clear. The 2013 trial at Leicester Crown Court opened in silence. Prosecutors presented photographs of the crime scene. The jury listened to testimony, weighed against evidence. Michelle was portrayed as both jealous and controlling, yet also a mother of two. The defense spoke of mental strain, disorder after constant arguments. The prosecution countered, the act of killing was unmistakable. The final verdict, Michelle Mills, sentenced to life imprisonment, minimum term 15 years. When the sentence was read, she neither cried nor spoke. In the courtroom, only a faint murmur remained, fading quickly into silence. Eddie Miller was buried quietly. His relatives said they still could not understand how a brief relationship, seemingly harmless, had ended in such a brutal conclusion. The case became another entry in British police records. Evidence that violence in relationships does not only come from men. Victims can also be male, equally vulnerable within cycles of jealousy and control. The Leicester house was later sold. But for those who had lived nearby, the memory did not fade. They still recalled that bonfire night, when the fireworks lit the sky, and thought of the silent room where 24 stab wounds had drowned out the final cry. 24 strikes in the Leicester house turned a night of fireworks into a dark memory. But not all deaths came from kitchen knives. Some came from heavier, rougher tools. When anger and control crossed a boundary, the small blade was no longer enough. In Leeds, inside a locked room, the violence began with handcuffs and a blindfold. It ended with an axe, swung down more than 20 times. There were no fireworks outside the window to mask the sound, only the repeated clash of metal striking bone, echoing through 4 walls. Leeds, May 2001. A ground-floor flat stood still on the edge of the city. Outside, the night was quiet. The door shut. Inside, a weak light fell across a cluttered living room, where a violent game had begun. Janet Charlton, 36, lived with Danny O'Brien. They had met when Janet was working as a sex worker. Danny, older, drew her into a relationship where control was his. Neighbors said They often heard arguments, doors slammed, followed by long silences. In later police files, the phrase repeated, coercive control, domination both physical and psychological. On the night of May 23rd, Danny bound Janet with handcuffs, blindfolded her. For him, it was a sex game. For her, it was a locked room without escape. On the table, an axe had been left, heavy, with a rough wooden handle. When Danny faltered, Janet reached it. The first strikes came fast, unsteady. Then heavier, repeated more than 20 times. When it stopped, Danny lay motionless on the floor, his head and chest destroyed. Blood spread across the floor, covering Janet's hands, soaking into the carpet. No one heard a scream. The door remained closed. The flat stayed silent. Outside, passers-by noticed nothing, only that the living room light had gone dark in the middle of the night. Janet did not call for help. 6 weeks passed. Danny's body decomposed in the flat, the odor spreading into the hallway. A neighbor called police after noticing Danny's absence, and Janet's too. When officers forced the door, they found the decayed body on the floor, beside the blood-stained axe. Janet was there, exhausted, and later gave herself up. Her statement was simple. He wouldn't stop. A blunt assertion, without detail. The trial opened at Leeds Crown Court. Prosecutors described a brutal killing, more than 20 axe strikes, deliberate and cold. But the defense presented another direction. Janet as a victim of prolonged psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. Danny's death, they argued, was the result of years of coercive control. In the end, the court ruled manslaughter by provocation. Janet received a 5-year sentence. After appeal, it was reduced to 3.5. A light sentence compared to the level of violence. But in official records, the case was noted as an early example of coercive control, a legal concept still new at the time. Danny was buried quietly. His family did not wish to speak much. Janet served her sentence in silence, then disappeared from public attention after release. The Leeds flat was later cleared, resold, but those who once passed by still remembered the odor seeping into the hallway that year, and the story of a man struck more than 20 times in a locked room. The case left no clear answers, only gaps. Where is the line between self-defense and murder? Between victim and perpetrator? And when control in a relationship turns into a shackle, could the outcome be anything other than blood spreading across the floor? Across these cases, the detail repeats. Jealousy erupting in a closed room, a kitchen knife meant for preparing meals, and finally, the heavy silence descending after an argument. No stranger entered. The killer was the one most trusted, a wife, a husband, a lover. From Greenwich to Newcastle, from Peterborough to Leicester, then Leeds. Houses once considered shelters became crime scenes, each wall holding an echo. The first strike, the rapid breath, then absolute void. The haunting element is not only the number of blows, not only the still body, but how everything began in ordinary ways. A jealous question, a reproach, an argument. Details so familiar that no one noticed they could ignite tragedy. The remaining question, how many rooms around us carry the same silence? How many unspoken jealousies lie waiting to become wounds? If these stories leave you unsettled, leave your thoughts in the comments. And to continue opening the files not yet closed, subscribe, so that when darkness returns, you will not arrive late before the truth. One final reminder: be cautious of the smallest signs within a relationship. Sometimes, the silence after an argument is more dangerous than any sound.